So when we're looking at has many through, we could kind of look at this patient physician example, because a patient could have many physicians. I could have like my, heart doctor. I could have my ear doctor. I can have many of them. And obviously a physician has many patients. Now, when you have a many-to-many relationship, what you're going to end up doing in the database is you're going to create what's called a join table. And this join table is going to be the thing that is kind of keeping track of what patient and physician are together. So with this join table, and you're going to see this with any many-to-many, you're going to have the ID of the two things as a column. So like I have physician ID and patient ID. And you can throw other things in there as well. Like you could throw like an appointment date. So this way I could go find, hey, physician ID 1, patient ID 1 has a date on like June 2nd. And then how we're going to set this up in Rails is like this. We're going to say a physician has many appointments, right? In this case, and a physician's also going to have many patients, but it's going to be through this appointments table. Because there's no like patient ID information in the physician's table. It's all kept track of in the appointments table. If we look at the appointments table, the appointment's going to belong to a physician and belong to a patient. So one appointment entry is going to have both a physician ID and a patient ID. If you don't have a patient or a physician, you're not going to have an appointment. And then our patient has many appointments and has many physicians through appointments. If we wanted to look at another example of a many-to-many system, you could think of something like Neo, like a learning management system, or like a college where you could have many users and courses. So users could have many courses, courses could have many users. And you could join them through like an enrollments table, like where you could have the user ID and course ID. So user ID 1 would be enrolled in course ID 1. And you could throw other, you definitely 100% have to have the two foreign keys of the table. But you could add other things. Like for this, you could maybe add a role. So this way I could be enrolled in a course as like a teacher or a student or a TA. Does this, let's maybe go to, I think just even drawing this out. So let's do what we're going to build today. I'm going to delete this. So what we're going to build today is we're going to have users and skills. Like a user has many skills and a skill can have many users. So like as a user, James, I could have the skill of like JavaScript, Rails, and Kung Fu. And then, Kung Fu could have many users. And then we're going to give them this join table that we're going to call it grade, where we could throw in, we don't have to throw this in, but we could throw in something like a score, like, I have this skill, but what's my score at it? So let's kind of look at like what this might look like, because here's going to be our model, like commands to create the model. So let's just throw these in here. So we're going to have a user table that has a name. So users, that's going to have an ID. The ID, remember, is the primary key, and then it's going to have a name. What type of data is our name going to be? from this.
Is it just a string?
Yeah, I heard that string. That'll be a string. Cool. Let's come in here. Let's do our skill model. Have a name. That'll be a string and a description. And that will also be a string. So we're also going to create this grade table. This is going to be a little new for us. So we're going to have the belongs to on here twice. So it's going to belong to a user and belong to a skill. So let's come draw out this table. So we're going to have a grades. This is going to have an ID. That will be the primary key. One more row. We're going to have a score. That's going to be an integer. Have a, so I say user belongs to, really what that's going to get created in my database is going to be a user ID column. And remember, this is what's called a foreign key. And the foreign key is going to be the ID of the, it's going to be the primary key of the thing in the users table. We're also going to have a skill ID. That is also going to be a foreign key. And that's it. And then these two, we kind of join these up like this.
Now with skill, for name, you could put JavaScript. For description, you just put like a computer programming language or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So the description would be about the thing. And let's do that too. Let's create, because I think visually, if we see this, it will help. So let's create some like fake data, or like what this might look like in our database. So let's say we have like users. This would be like ID, name, and there's nothing here. That's all we have in there. And let's just make these not 1 and 2. Let's make them like 10 and 20. So we can have like Bob and Sally. Okay, and then come in here. Let's do our skills. So we could have ID, name, description, 40. So yeah, this could be like JS, this could be Ruby. Okay, so just something about, the language, the description. So we could actually have some data in there. So now let's go look at like, I need one more row. Okay, let's come in here. Let's do the, I'm just gonna have to kind of make this look a little weird. So this would be our grades table. So we'd have the ID. Then we also have like the user ID. I kind of just, because I can't create another row on here, so I'm going to kind of fake one. These would be their own thing. Skill ID. And then we would have, like our score. So what I'm going to do in the grades table, this is where I keep track of the IDs. So let's do some extra rows. So, I could have user ID 10 in here a couple times. And, they could have skill in here, like 30, and a score of like 90. Or, you know, they could have so is this kind of readable in a sense? Do you kind of get what's going on here? Like, how would you say this? Like looking just at the grades table, what would you say about like this one row?
That you have a graph with users and skills ID and you're giving them a score.
Now, like, just like in like, so it's understandable, like what user has what skill and what's their score. Like in a user-friendly sentence.
User 10 has a score of 70 and their skill ID is 40.
But even like, yeah, user 10, but who's user 10?
User
It
10
would be
Bob.
like, it'd be like Bob has a 70% in Ruby, right?
Yeah.
Or score of 70.
Yeah. So you said, yeah, Bob. So that's kind of what I meant. That's kind of unclear, but yeah, I would read this as like, yeah, Bob has got a 70 on Ruby. This one, Bob has a 90 on JavaScript. And then, you know, that record has the idea of like 100. That information, you know, has the primary key of 100. So if I wanted to look up that one, or I wanted to edit this one, I need to find it by 100. And yeah, here, this would be Sally got a 65 on JavaScript. Does this, any questions on this? Like if this doesn't make sense, then it's not going to make sense when we get to the code. This is kind of like the pre-code visualization.
I feel like the visualization of it kind of makes sense. Yeah, it's gonna be more complicated once we start implementing it, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really, I mean, this is where Rails is really going to be nice to us, because this is how we're going to create this model. It's very similar to how we do a has many. We just have two things that it's going to belong to. And then when we set up our associations, we just need to do this in our models. So we're going to do like a user has many skill, or sorry, has many grades, and has many skills through grades. So you can always like reference one of these tables, because it's going to be the same. It's just going to be like the table names are going to be changed out. But I think, yeah, this join table, this is like understanding this is it's kind of like the cornerstone of, you know, really understanding this association. And I think like visually, that's what we just did. That's how your data is going to be stored. Cool. So let's go ahead. Let's build this out. Okay, so I'm going to have us start, so we don't have to like do all this setup. We're going to just clone down from the starter project. Now, this is something definitely before the hackathon, I'm going to want you to create your own starter project. And this is definitely going to be something, you cannot use any of this. Like I mean, you once again, you might be like using it as a reference, but if for your hackathon, because for your hackathon, you're going to be able to use like a starter project. If I just like tell you're just following mine exactly you're going to get dinged some points. Like I want you to create your own. Now, once again, there is just going to be code that, I mean, that's going to look the same. Like if we look at like this has many association, like this is how it's always going to look. And you know, it's not going to change. But there's going to be things that I'm going to tell like, oh, you follow this exactly. And that's not going to, that will like get you ding some points. But for now, yeah, we can just use this. So here's how we're going to do this. We're just going to clone it, and I'll throw this out in Slack. Okay. So go into your week 6 directory. Don't like, so in that it says like, you know, project name. So this is like a starter project. It's meant to be used as like a starter for like many projects. So I need to like come up with my own name. So I'm going to name this, let's call this has many through or something. Or this is like our skills app. So I could do skills has many through spring 22, whatever. So that's cloning that. I can now CD into that. So there's some kind of loose instructions on, I mean, these are the things we need to do. They're not spelled out for you exactly, but this is what we need to do to get this running. So there's actually this is kind of a new step that we haven't talked about. We need to rename our database in the database YAML. So the reason we need to do this, so I'm cloning down a project that has a particular database name. So you don't just watch this. Let me just show you this. If I do a Rails DB create, it's going to go through and it's going to create this database. And notice the name of it is Rails Router 6 Content Development and Rails Router 6 Context Development. It's not like the name of my project. So if I were to like clone this repo down again, and because I wanted to use it for like another project, so we'll just call this another proj. Actually, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to CD back, and I'm going to clone, use this starter to clone in another project. It's like, maybe this is like homework or something. CD into homework. And then like, now I want to create a database for this project. Rails DB create. So what it's saying, hey, this database already exists because it exists in this project. Okay, well, let's just drop it. Rails DB drop. DB create. Cool. So I dropped it and I recreated it. Problem solved. But what did I just do?
You messed up the other project's database.
Yeah, I just destroyed their database. So I'm going to have, you know, I'm going to want different databases that have their own, because a database is going to have their own tables. It's going to have their own like information. I definitely need different databases for my different Rails project. So I can't just, I mean, I can drop it if I don't really care about the other project, but that's not going to be the way to solve this. So I'm going to go back into my skills project. So that's what this first step is right here. We're renaming our database in the database.yml file. So how does that work? So what I do is I go find that file. So with VS Code, I could just do a Command P and search for database YAML, or I could go in my config folder and it's in there. Cool. So here is where I can change the name. So, and I'm going to have 3 different databases. I'm going to have a development, a test, and a production. Now, for now, we're just using the development one. So this is the one I want to change. Like this is the one I need to change. And then we also saw like they create the test. So I'd want to change that one, but let's do this. Let's go in and let's find that name of this project. So this one, it's Rails router 6 context. I'm going to leave this underscore development. I'm just going to highlight this and I'm going to do a Command F. This is a nice little VS Code. I mean, Command F works for a lot of applications where you can like find this word. I don't have to highlight it. I could just do a Command F, bring this up. And I want this Rails router 6 context in here. And now what I want to do is just replace it with, what I want to call this. So I want to call this like skills, has many through. I'll just keep it the same as like my project name. And then I can go through, I can replace them all or replace them I'm going to replace them one at a time just so I can kind of go through and look at them like, yeah, let's change that. See, now I'm going through and I'm changing the names.
So it even changes the name if it's commented out too.
Yeah, I mean, it just changes it. It just changes it in the comments. So it's more readable. The comments doesn't really matter, but it just makes it more readable. I mean, really, we only have to change 2 of them. We just need to change this, the development one and the test one, but it doesn't really hurt to like go through and, change them all. So now I can do in here, I can do a Rails DB drop, DB create. So now it destroyed those database, like it created this database. And now I shouldn't have to, when I clone this down, after I rename it, I shouldn't have to drop it. I should just be able to create it. So if I were to do that, like in my, my homework one, same thing, I would go through, open it up in VS Code. And where did it go? Code dot. It's kind of the same process. I'm going to go find my database YAML, search for the original database and change it to like whatever I want, the project name. Just go change them. Create a Rails DB create. And it creates those databases with those names. See, this is HW development. That's the name right there. So the development name is going to be HW underscore development. Cool. So if we continue on, so this is kind of like just what we normally would want to do with the Rails project. Once we clone it down, we need to bundle, we need to create, migrate, and seed the database. There's really nothing in here to migrate or seed yet. So don't technically have to do that. It's not really going to hurt. So I could do a Rails, DB migrate. There's nothing really to there's no tables there, so it doesn't do anything, but it doesn't like break anything either. So I have this because like in your clone. Maybe you do have some like dummy data just to test it to make sure it's working. Okay. Oh yeah, I also need to do bundle. That is definitely something I want to do. And then inside of here, there's going to be a client directory. That's where, you know, the JavaScript stuff, React stuff's living. So I want to do a yarn. And yeah, I'm going to want to remove the get remote. So that's the RM. So that's the get remote RM origin. Now I'm forgetting this command. So if I do a get remote -v now, there shouldn't, it's not, because I definitely don't want this to, or let me ask you, why do I want to remove the remote?
Because that's your remote, right?
It's going to, because this is going to have, it's my remote. But even like if this was your own starter project, like and you have like permissions, why is that? This is like pretty important to do this. I've done this before where I forget to do this.
If we were to push something back up, it would erase or it would write over your project that you created.
Yeah, it like push up. Like I want this to be like, this is meant to kind of be that like bare bones starter for multiple projects. So if I forget to remove the remote and just kind of get in like my GitHub flow and like do a git add, git commit, git push, I'm going to push up to this project. Like if we did like our skills app, I would push up to this repository. It would have all my skill stuff. Now it's not really, it's going to make it less reusable. So I want this to go to its own, like its own repo. And what I have, if I do an ls, like I have a folder that has, that's where I'm keeping this. I'm calling it starters, and that's where like this project lives. So if down, and this is going to happen down the road when we do like authentication, I'm going to want to add authentication to this starter project. So I don't have to do authentication for all my apps. I can just do it once and then I can have it built in. So I'd want to go in and then I'd want to go change this project and then push that up. Or like I wanted to add like React Bootstrap. I would do that here. We'll get to that later. It's not super important now that you do this because you're not going to be able to push to this because you don't have permission. It's really important for me because I can push and I can overwrite this project. And then, yeah, it says add a new get remote. So let's just do that right now while we're here. Let's do a new repository. Let's call this, what did I call this? Just kind of copy this name. And now I can add that as my repo. And now I can go ahead and do like a git add, git commit. M. This one's called main. So I do a git push origin main. And now here's, I'll throw this out in Slack too. So this will be the repo for the lecture. So there's the steps to get this up and running. Oh yeah, we should test it. That should probably be a little part of this. So let's do a rels s-p 3001. yarn start. So let's kind of see what we're getting. It looks like we're getting like React, Faker, Pry-Rails, React Router, Axios styled components. So if I look at this app, if I do a like up and running, it just says starter app. I can go home. There's like a home page that's just like, hey, welcome to the starter project. There's this about. So when we start creating your own starter projects, we're going to create this about page that kind of like shows some of the features. This one's not really done, but it's going to be something I'm going to want to see in your starter projects. Like what kind of things, like what components do you have? What kind of custom hooks do you have in here? So it's a page that you can have about the like information about your starter project. Cool. Questions on this?
This is cool. I appreciate the template.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said, you can definitely be using this for now, but by hackathon time, I'm going to want you all to have like created your own, because it's good. It's going to be good experience to like start creating this, start creating some like custom hooks, start creating some custom components. And then that's also going to be like almost like a head start, or like the better your starter project is, it's going to make the hackathon easier, because you're going to have like potentially custom stuff. And we'll add, as we're going through these next couple of weeks, we'll be adding stuff to this. Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
That first step where you did the database YAML thing, remind me when do we do that exactly? Like, why did we do that?
So, I mean, you get the point of like this starter app. It's so I can clone it down, and like I have like a Rails app set up. I have React Router. I have a data provider. I have Axios installed. Like I have all of this stuff ready to go, and all I need to do is clone it down and follow these steps. But I need to rename my database, because I'm assuming I'm going to be using this starter project for multiple projects, like multiple homeworks, multiple like lectures. So I want to keep those data, like I want them to each have their unique database. So
Okay,
I need to rename that. It's the same reason I need to remove like the Git remote. I want them to have their unique remotes pointing to their individual repositories. And yeah, this bundle create migrate seed, that's just what I do anyway. And like same thing with the yarn. Cool. All right, so now that's set up. Yeah, and what we have, like I said, we have like, this is what we get. We have our app. We have a client. I mean, this client one was really, this client directory was really just use this starter project. Remember like this React Router one that we used? So it's like, this is just a starter project within a starter project. But now these are now decoupled. So yeah, so if we look on, and also this is, I'm fine if you use my same like folder structure. That's fine. You can create your own folder structure. I mean, obviously with Rails, you kind of use Rails, like the structure they give you. But I've kind of created this folder structure within our React app, where I have a source folder. I have pages, which is meant to be like where I put, a main page for like React Router. Like it's going to be like its own page. Providers, this is where, if you want like a data provider, you throw those there. We're going to have oh, this does not work. I need to like get rid of that. We're gonna have a place where we can put your custom hooks. So we're gonna write some custom hooks as we go around, and then we're gonna have a place where we can have some components, like shared components throughout many pages. And we'll I want a card component that just has a border. I want to use that in multiple places. So that's kind of the basic folder structure. You're welcome to come up with your own. But that's how I'm going to do it. But yeah, if I see your starter project and you have this style, padding, 0, 20 pixels, and your links are separated by these dashes, you're gonna that's plagiarism. Does that make sense? Why would you have a dash right? What?
But what if I really like it like that?
I'm kind of making this look bad on purpose. It's why did you go in and just put a gap there naturally? And maybe do your own custom navigation container. At least use React Boot, use a third-party library or do your own. For the homework, I don't care. The homework's fine. You can definitely use this for your homework.
You're just saying by the time that hackathon part 2 comes, we should already have our own custom starter page accustomed to us.
Yeah. And when we go through authentication, authentication is going to that's going to look the same. I'm not expecting some parts to be different. The auth part is that should probably look more or less pretty close. But because that's going to be your homework one day, it's going to be hey, add authentication to your starter project. So I don't want, yeah. Cool. Sweet. So yeah, let's go ahead and we've kind of talked about the has many through. We've kind of talked about the starter project. So let's go code now. Get our models set up and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm going to stop my server, my Rails server, and let's go create those models. So remember we had a user model, so Rails G model user, and that just had a name, which was a string. Okay. We also had a skill table or skill model. So Rails.
Was that supposed to have a belongs to, or do we do that later?
That's going to be in our grade. So we're going to do our Rails G model skill that had a name, which was a string. So I don't need to say that it's a string, and it also had a description, which is also a string. So nothing new there. So yeah, this is where, we need to make sure we do this right. So I'm going to now create my grade model, Rails G model grade. So this has a score, which was a integer. It's going to have a user that it belongs to. And it also has a skill that it belongs to. Okay, so now I can I've created some migrations files. So now I need to do a Rails DB migrate. That creates my tables. I think this is always a good time when you do especially when you have associations, to go look at your schema and make sure it like looks good, that you didn't misspell anything or you didn't forget an association. So I've migrated. So now I can go into like my app. I'm going to go into my database folder, into the schema file, and just see, make sure everything looks good. So I have, grades. So this has the score, but then it has these two, they're being saved as a big int, but these are my foreign keys. So I have user underscore ID and skill underscore ID. That's exactly what I want. Those can't be null. So if I create a grade, I have to give it a user ID and I have to give it a skill ID, or it won't successfully save. It's the same thing with the has many. Like the thing that belongs to, it has to have the ID of the thing that it belongs to, or you won't save to the database. And then I have my skills and users table. And then I have like these foreign keys added. So I have a skills foreign key and a users foreign key, which is just these IDs. Cool. So the next step is to go into my models and add the association here. So this is for like my database. This is at the database layer, having these IDs here, keep it, are like 100% required for the database. This next thing I'm going to do is for rels. And this is going to make my life easier in rels. So my grade belongs to a user and belongs to a skill. And then my skill can have many. So my skill has many grades. And it also has many users through grades. So Rails does, this is a confusing example, but Rails is making this like really readable, has many grades, has many users through grades. My users table also has, or my user model is also going to have many grades. It's going to has many skills. The user has many skills, but it's through that join table, through our grades table. And that's all we need to do to set up this association in Rails. So the next thing to do would be to actually go, we've kind of looked at it, we think it's looking good. The next definite thing is to go test it out. So I'm going to go into my Rails console and I'm going to create a couple of users. So user.create. Your name, let's create Bob and Sally. So now I have two users. Okay, let's go create, some skills. So skill dot create. And let's do Ruby. So now I can do something like skill.all and user.all. So let's do a grade dot create. I need a score, so I could do like score is going to be, 100. Technically I don't need a score. This is optional, but we're going to throw it in there as our database is right now. But I do 100% need a user ID. Is that going to work?
Why wouldn't it? Isn't the ID just a number?
Yeah. Do I have a user with ID 1231234 in my database?
Oh, my Zoom cut off the bottom of that. No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I
You
need
need one or
I-
two, right?
Yeah, I need an ID, so it has to be an ID, but it has to be there, but it also has to be a valid ID. Like it needs to be like a user in my database. So I could do user ID, and then I need a skill ID, which could be. So what is this saying? Like, what is this grade? Like, say this to me in English.
This is saying Bob has scored 100 in web.
Yeah. Yeah, and got
Or
J.
in JS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. But in my database, this is how it's getting stored. It's like this has an ID of 1, it has a score of 100, and then the user ID is going to be 1, and skill ID is going to be 1. So that's how this information is stored to that table. But now what Rails does for us when we did that like has many through in our models, this is going to make this easy to kind of think about like in English. So I can do like grade dot first. So I can pull off that grade. Let's store that to a variable just so we can kind of play around with it. So now I have G1. Well, doesn't G1, it belongs to a user, right? So G1.user, there's my user. What's the user's name? Bob. Doesn't my user have many grades? So I could go, hey, get that user's grades. I could do G1 dot skill. Like what skill is this grade associated with? It's JavaScript. Doesn't my skill have many users? So here's all the users that have this skill, Bob. So let's create another grade. So let's, give him 90. So user ID 2, I believe is Sally, is going to have a 90 on JavaScript. And I could say, Sally now has a, 100 Ruby. But it's getting stored just as like the IDs. And then we could go ahead and say, let's give Bob like an 80 in Ruby. So now I can do like grade dot all. It's kind of keeping track of all the IDs and the scores. So now I could do like user dot first. So let's find the first user. That's Bob. Let's grab Bob's grades. Okay, so there's all the grades. What is the first grade? What's the score on that? I can just like kind of drill into that. So grab the first user, grab all their grades, grab the first grade and tell me the score. Or I could say, hey, grab the first grade. Tell me what skill that is. Dot name. And you can really go like in loops here, but I can grab my first user. Let's grab my user. Let's grab their skills. So these are the skills that Bob has. You know, it's got JS and Ruby. Notice these don't have the scores associated with them. It's just, you know, Bob knows JavaScript. Bob knows Ruby. I could also do like skill dot first dot users. Here's all the users who have many of this, like who have the skill of JavaScript. Let's create another skill. Skill.create. Name of like arm wrestling. Arm wrestling. So let's get my user dot first. Store that to a variable, just call it Bob. Let's do Bob dot grades dot create. Let's give Bob a grade of with arm wrestling. So Bob's not good. He's got a 50. Now, what do I need here? I need the skill ID. So that's ID 3. Do you think I need the user ID here?
No, because you already have Bob.
Yeah, so Rails
You already have
behind
it
this.
defined.
Yeah, since I'm using Bob, this instance variable Bob, which is a user to create this grade, Rails is behind the scene is going to like do that for me. I do need the skill ID. If I don't give it the skill ID, that's not created in the database because the ID is nil. That's how I know this was not saved. It's saved in memory. I could do like G1 or like just G equals this. Like this is in memory, in my computer memory. It's not in my database though, because this needs a skill ID. Let's give it a skill ID. Now if I look at it, now it has a skill ID, still not in my database. Let's just do a g.save. Now it is in my database. It's got that ID. All right, let's do a seeds file and then we'll take a break. I'm probably just gonna Slack this out. So in the notes, okay, so here's my seeds file. Let's just kind of look at this. Okay. So I'm creating like 5 skills. So skill could be something like Ruby, Rails, React, or it could be a homework, just, you know, whatever. And then I go through. So I'm doing a loop in Ruby, a 5 times do loop. I go through and I create 5 users. And I'm using Faker to just come up with a fake name. And then within this loop, I go and create 6 times, I create 6 grades. Except that shouldn't be 6 because I only have 5 skills. I'm going to do this. That should be a 5, right? Because I only have 5 skills. So I use my user ID that was just created for the user ID, and then the skill ID, I'm going to use this I. What is this I? This I is going to be the count of this iterator. So it's going to start at 1 and it goes up to 5. I wonder if I can use Faker in my Rails console. So see how that faker.name, it just like pulls up a fake name. I think there's probably like a first on here too, top first or something. Oh, that just grabs the first letter. That's all that's doing. Let's see if I can do this like a 5 times do. Just kind of want to show what this is doing. So if I do a 5 times do, it starts at 0 and counts up to 5.
But if you do that for ID, you wouldn't want an ID of 0, right?
Yeah, so I might want to do like I plus 1. That give me what I want, puts I plus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it just returns, I don't know why it returns the number. So I'll just switch that to I plus 1. But what is this kind of like making the assumption? Or what assumption am I making here?
You're going to have 5 skills.
I'm going to have 5 skills, but I'm also making the assumption their IDs are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which is not a good assumption. Or like what I need to keep track of is when I run my seeds file, I need to drop my database.
So that's why you put like the destroy at the top, right? Or you can do that.
That's not going to do it though, right? If I do like a grade or skill.destroy, that doesn't reset the ID.
Okay.
Right.
Dropping is the only way to get rid of everything.
Dropping is the only way to reset it to 0. Like it's weird. It's like this weird logic. I'm assuming I'm going to have a skill 1 through 5.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I could do something else. I could maybe do like, I could find like the first, like do like skill equals, I could do it right here. I could say like, or store this one to a variable. Like the last thing I create. And then ID equals s.id. And then have this be like, take the ID, add I, and add 1. I don't know. I think for like this, I think it's fair just to be like, okay, if I run my seeds file, I need to drop my database. That works for me. Put a note there. or change loop where grade is created. And like, this would maybe be a good comment, like to leave here, like assumes, skill, have IDs 1 through 5. So now I can exit, can do a Rails DB seed. Oh yeah, so I've already created some, right? So I have 8 skills. So yeah, I don't even want to think about what that did. I'm gonna drop. I think I can just do a reset, right? Reset, we'll do it. Cool. I don't know if you saw that, but how many grades do you think I should have in my database? Because I put those size here. First, how many users am I going to have? Well, let's start with the easy one. How many skills am I going to have?
5.
5. Okay. So how many users am I going to have?
5.
5. How many grades am I going to have?
5.
So this 5 times loop is in this 5 times loop. So 5 times I'm going to create 5 grades. So it's 5 times 5.
25.
So each user is going to have 5 grades. So yeah, 25 grades. So if I now step into my console Rails C and do like user dot first dot grades, that should be 5. And I just using some random, 0 to 100 for their grades. Cool. So yeah, let's take a break here. We got our models set up. We have some seeded data, and when we get back, we'll probably start with our controllers. So let's take a break. Let's come back. Let's just call it 11 o'clock. See you then. And I'll
Sounds good.
also put this up to GitHub.
You know how in Lucid Chart you use those ERD diagram things?
Yeah.
For our hackathon, we tried finding those. Is that something you have to pay for? Do you know offhand, or we couldn't buy them?
I didn't pay for them. I think you might have to.
I'll search it up. I was just wondering if you happen to know, like, just offhand. Yeah, we had to make our own little tables and they looked terrible, but okay.
I'm trying to think how there's a place where because you can do a whole bunch of you download them somewhere or
Oh yeah. So that yours are called basic database ER diagram. I'm gonna write that down. I'll search for it.
entity shapes. Where? Okay, I clicked on shapes.
Okay.
And then entity relationship. It's the one I'm using.
Entity relationship. Okay, cool. All right, thanks.
Cool, no problem.